Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Great America Show. Great to have you with us. Joe Biden is finally breaking his silence after more than a week of pro-Hamas rioting and demonstrations, insurrections, if you will, across American college campuses. Biden speaking at the White House this week, telling Hamas sympathizers they failed and have not forced him to reconsider his policies.
We've all seen the images, and they put to the test two fundamental American principles. The first is the right to free speech and for people to peacefully assemble and make their voices heard. The second is the rule of law. Both must be upheld. We are not an authoritarian nation where we silence people or squash dissent. The American people are heard. In fact, peaceful protest is in the best tradition of how Americans respond to consequential issues. But neither are we a lawless country. We are a civil society, and order must prevail.
Mr. President, have the protests forced you to reconsider any of the policies with regard to the region?
No. Thank you.
Mr. President, do you think the National Guard should intervene?
No.
Well, that was good as far as it went, I guess. The question is, what took him so long to finally denounce these outright terrorists, and why did it take Marxist Dem Mayor Eric Adams to allow the NYPD to take back Columbia University? Only more proof Joe Biden is just a puppet with masters pulling all of his strings. And reporting from the O'Keefe Media Group shows explosive undercover video of the deep state's plot against Donald Trump. The video shows a CIA contractor talking about intel agencies conspiring to withhold information, classified information, from then President Donald Trump.
Like working?
We kept information from him.
Say one more time.
We kept information from him.
From Trump?
Yes. He sent me a video. And there are certain people that would give him a high-level overview, but never give it any details. Do you know why? It's called leak those details.
So the agencies kind of like all got together and said, we're not going to tell Trump.
The higher ups.
The higher ups.
We put it this way, the executive staff. We're talking about the director and his subordinates.
Like what titles are they? They're
Director of the CIA.
Director of the CIA would keep.
Yes.
Are you guys still watching him?
I would say yes.
Like, it sounds like you guys are still watching him and his team.
Of course we are. Nothing goes by without somebody watching.
Great undercover work by O'Keefe and exposing the deep state government gangsters who want to do all they can to destroy Donald Trump and certainly destroy America. Our guest today is the founder of ClimateDepot.com. He's the author of the important book, The Great Reset: Global Elites and the Permanent Lockdown. Our guest is Marc Morano. And now here is Marc Morano. And Marc, great to have you with us here on the Great America Show. Let's start with this recent Washington Post editorial ballyhooing the oligarchs, the billionaire class who are contemplating, which probably means planning rigidly right now, to re-engineer the climate for this sick planet of ours. You're thinking.
Well, this is part of a strategy, first of all, to scare us. They admit, even Bill Gates has given billions to Harvard University to block the sun. The Washington Post editorial actually says humans might need to re-engineer the climate. And what they're doing is they're scaring us. They know it's radical, risky, untested, with unknown effects. But they're basically saying it's implied that we're not buying enough EVs. We're driving our gas-powered cars. We're eating too many hamburgers. We're keeping our house too cool in the summer. So therefore, they have to do these radical experiments on the atmosphere. And what's really humorous about this is a couple things. They're essentially talking about injecting pollutants into the sky, chemicals to block the sun, create global dimming so that we can cool the earth. That's what Bill Gates is doing. That's what the Washington Post. They want to inject 100,000 tons of sulfur into our lower stratosphere to block solar rays. The problem with this is these are typically considered a pollutant. We have scrubbers on coal plants. This is what they said was causing acid rain, if you remember that, Lou, back in the 80s and early 90s. And so if you go back to the 1970s, we actually had, before fossil fuels caused global warming, fossil fuels caused man-made global cooling, because they were afraid our fossil fuels were creating aerosols, blocking the sun, creating global dimming, and therefore creating a man-made global cooling period. We had warnings of a coming ice age. You had CIA reports about it, NASA scientists warning about it. You had Leonard Nimoy doing specials. They wanted to geoengineer the climate in the 1970s to prevent global cooling. They wanted to put black soot on the Arctic to try to melt the ice caps because they were afraid they were getting too big. So this is just the latest. This is Jeff Bezos' employees. It's important to know this is the editorial board of the Washington Post, not an op-ed contributor, not some article they did. These are people who get a paycheck directly from Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos is at every UN climate summit. I've seen him. I've been into 19 out of the last 21. Jeff Bezos is now very close to Bill Gates in buying up U.S. farmland. These are megalomaniacal billionaires who now they want to control agriculture. They want to control the climate. It's it's like Dr. Evil from the comedy film. This is really where we are, where the Washington Post is pushing this kind of experiment of re-engineering our climate.
You know, I love the fools in the swamp because they all think they're so clever. And we'll get to the donor class, the billionaires, in just a moment. But the idiots in proximity of Capitol Hill, 1600 Pennsylvania, the Supreme Court even. These people are out of their minds. They really believe that another budgetary item, one more government program, will solve all of the world's ills, even those that are not man-made, even those that do not touch our shores. We go in search of these problems, seeking solutions, and inevitably, the federal government has a plan, and all it'll cost the taxpayers is another $10 billion, $20 billion. So the template is set. But for Jeff Bezos to also have the Washington Post, arguably the most powerful newspaper in all the world, and to be able to work his will across those poor representatives in the House and those unfortunate senators in the Senate, the man has untold political power, economic power, and to think that there's an FTC, a SEC that would even deign to take on Jeff Bezos, it's unthinkable. That's what everybody is dealing with. And by the way, if you're a billionaire in this country, that makes you a genius, which is the most amazing thing of all to me. I don't know of billionaires who get Nobel Prizes for chemistry, for physics, for mathematics, theoretical mathematics, whatever it may be. Do you?
No, I don't. But you have billionaires like Bill Gates who believe in philanthrocapitalism. And here's the odd thing about it, Bill. The more money they give away, the richer they become because it supports their business model. In the case of Bill Gates, he's the single largest donor to the World Health Organization. He's donating to the Harvard University to block the sun. And he and Richard Branson, another billionaire, are investing billions in lab-grown meat. And that was approved last year by the United States Federal Department of Agriculture for human consumption. The FDA approved it. Bill Gates it's fetal blood from a cow, sheep, pig mixed with stem cells put into a petri dish, then a steel vat, allowed to fester, additives, color, texture, and then it's printed on a 3D printer. And it's technically meat because it's derived. But this is what the billionaire class is doing.
To be honest, that just sounds so yummy. I mean, I bet millions of Americans would give anything to have a big old bite of that.
Well, what they do is they're softening us up, Lou. John Kerry has announced U.S. agriculture is now in the crosshairs of net zero climate goals, which means they're coming after nitrogen fertilizer, high yield agriculture, collapsing yields, rationing food, and they're coming after methane separately, which is going after meat eating. So they're going to ration meat and high yield agriculture. That softens us up to be willing to accept Bill Gates and Richard Branson lab-grown meat, and also softens us up to eat insects, which are now being shown all over. Tyson Food just invested in a new insect processing plant for consumption. So they mean it. And the way they get us is they ration us and they create the chaos, and we're more likely to accept it.
And Tyson Food is another great corporate citizen of the United States. I mean, they never run afoul of law, ethics, or the national interest, which means they do it all the time.
Right.
The instance in which Tyson decided that they were just quit hiring a few illegal aliens in this country and put them in their place, they fired the American employees and just brought in wholesale illegal aliens this year and the end of last year to do just that. And so now we're supposed to listen to them about what bugs how bugs should be served. It's also extraordinary to me that when you think about Bill Gates and you think about Richard Branson, do you suppose diet has anything to do with the way they look? Because I don't think most Americans want to adopt that look that they individually have. And if you could avoid that look, I think probably some people might get behind some of those burgers. But otherwise, I think that's a dead idea looking for a home. We're talking with Marc Morano, and we're going to be at the Climate Depot, and we're going to be talking about what ails this atmosphere, this country, and what is the real deal when it comes to global warming, global cooling. How sick is our atmosphere? How sick is our planet? Or is it sick at all? We'll be right back with Marc Morano. Stay with us.
Wellness Company and their doctors are medical professionals you can trust. And their new medical emergency kits are the gold standard when it comes to keeping you safe and healthy. This medical emergency kit contains an assortment of life-saving medications, including ivermectin, Z-Pak. Rest assured, knowing that you have emergency antibiotics, antivirals, and antiparasitics on hand to help you and your family stay safe from whatever life throws at you next.
We're back with Marc Morano of the Climate Depot. And as I was saying earlier, I mean, Marc has prevailed against most of the megalomaniacal class of elites in this world on the issue of climate, on the issue of following the science and what is science and what is not. Seems to be strangely important to him. Strangely, if you look at all of the billionaires trying to work their way around the science to get to their desired, let's say, business interest in terms of public policy. Marc, it's, as I said, it's just great to have you with us and to take up this issue. I want to deal first with just how sick is this atmosphere? How sick is this planet? And give us your thoughts on just the condition of the rhetorical patient here.
All right. Well, what they try to tell you is that the climate is in crisis. Al Gore will tell you the planet has a fever. And of course, the Biden administration says we're in a national climate emergency. This is what they want you to believe. When Al Gore's film came out in 2006, I was working for the U.S. Senate Environment Public Works Committee. It just started. And we decided to gather up, because Al Gore was saying publicly, and the UN climate scientists were saying publicly, that there were only half a dozen scientists who disagreed that we were in a climate crisis. We ended up collecting over 400 prominent scientists from around the world through Senator James Inhofe of Oklahoma, who chaired the then Senate Environment Public Works. We grew that list to over 1,000 scientists. These included former UN scientists, Nobel Prize winning scientists, former NASA scientists, MIT scientists, Ivy League University scientists. And to a person, they were screaming, no, no, just like during COVID, when you had the COVID lockdowns and you had the Barrington Declaration. What do you think happened to those scientists who came out against COVID lockdowns? They were canceled, defunded, disinvited to scientific conferences, couldn't get their work published, censored by the White House, censored by the intelligence agencies, censored by big tech. The same thing happened back when Al Gore's film came out to the climate community. So I'd seen it all. And the basic message that these scientists will tell you is the Earth is not have a fever. The Earth is not in a climate crisis. Why? Because geologically speaking, we are in the 10% coldest period in Earth's history. In other words, 90% of Earth's geologic history has been warmer than today, too warm to have ice at either pole. Today, we have ice at both poles. We are also in a CO2 famine, according to Princeton physicist Dr. Will Happer, the foremost expert on carbon dioxide. He's done 200 peer-reviewed studies. He has said, if you look at the CO2 levels, 90% of the Earth's history, CO2 levels were much, much higher than today. And one of the things Al Gore did as a trick when he showed you that CO2 levels, he showed you just the last 100,000 or 200,000 years. But if you go back further, CO2 levels were much, much higher. We are geologically in the lowest period. And to just go a little bit further, the United Nations first climate report, 1990, showed the medieval warm period much warmer than temperatures today. And then there was a campaign to say we have to get rid of the medieval warm period. Within a decade, the UN came out with a revised past history chart showing the medieval warm period disappeared and current temperatures a record. That's the kind of nonsense they do. But it's important to note that on hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, wildfires, drought, there's either no trend or declining trends on climate timescale for all these storms. And one last point, when you hear about there's a record in California since 1998 in Southwest California, they've never experienced a drought. If you look at it globally, all of these extreme weather events, no trend or declining trend. Even the UN admits it, buried in their reports. So what the media does and the way they try to present a heat wave here or a flood here or a tornado or a hurricane, it's like a lottery or let's say it's like a casino slot winner. A casino will highlight every slot winner, put them up on a casino wall holding a big cardboard check. You know, I won 50,000, I won 20,000. You get the impression that everyone's winning at slots. So you want to go play slots. The media does the same thing with extreme weather events by highlighting all these extreme weather events, which have always happened, always will happen. Nothing unusual is happening. They give the impression that extreme weather events are happening unprecedented every day, everywhere. And it's just not the case. So that's how they create this whole illusion of a climate crisis.
Well, let me just bring up the LA Times climate emergency editorial, claiming that, quote, the planet is experiencing a horrifying streak of record-breaking heat. Whoa. I mean, that sounds pretty dire. And it's coming from, after all, the LA Times. I'm trying to make it sound like I think of them as a high-class journalistic enterprise. I don't. It's a left-wing outlet.
Yeah, let's talk about heat waves. Let's take the United States as an example. And this may shock you, but it's at my website, Climate Depot. I wrote about it in my book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Climate Change. First of all, the Joe Biden EPA acknowledges that the heat waves in the 1930s, when we had the great Oklahoma Dust Bowl, when Steinbeck wrote The Grapes of Wrath, was not only hotter than today, but about 10 times hotter. And you can actually go on Joe Biden's EPA chart and look at the 1930s. Their heat wave index is up here. Modern heat waves are here. So how did they get around this? You know what they did? Temperatures then cooled in the 40s, 50s into the 70s, which is when I mentioned the aforementioned global cooling scare. Right. So the Joe Biden administration starts and says, since 1960, look at where heat waves have come in the United States to show this big rise. If they had gone back to the 1930s, they would have showed a big decline. So much so is this data inconvenient on heat waves that the LA Times ignored in the editorial you mentioned, that we have scientists now, the exact same way they got rid of the medieval warm period, publicly stating, there's a scientist from Texas A&M University who said we have to get rid of the 1930s EPA heat wave chart because it's inconvenient to the narrative. They just play around with data as though it's a political campaign, slogan that they have to, wordsmith and make it fit.
For them, that's precisely what it is. Yes. It is simply the basis for whatever convenient direction they want to go with the conclusions from all of that data. It's one of the reasons, for example, I mean, it's simple things like, why did all of the so-called social justice warriors want to start American history, not in the 1492, if you will? Why did they want to start it in 1857? They sort of missed the Civil War there. Maybe 1877 would be a better spot, because then you wouldn't have all that stuff with Reconstruction. I mean, it's the ignorance of the left is overwhelming. And by the way, ignorance is, in my opinion, winning in this country. Truth is losing.
I would argue it's ignorance and manipulation and willingness to just turn science into pure propaganda. Another example, 1970s, their start date. They always do that for, like, you'll see this whole campaign to get TV meteorologists to scare you about climate. They'll say since 1970, New York or Trenton or Philadelphia or Los Angeles has warmed this much. Why are they starting in 1970? Because that was the height of the global cooling scare. Same thing with Arctic ice, by the way. They pick the lowest point, the highest point in the late 70s, and they say, well, basically they don't say this out loud, but since we had the global cooling scare, Arctic ice has declined. And what they don't do is go back far enough. They're willing to cherry pick the timescales. It really is a campaign cause, Lou. It's like they will just say and manipulate any scientific data they need to. We know this because during the United Nations, when they had the ClimateGate scandal where the emails were released or hacked or someone got it, they actually admit in there that, oh, these solar scientists aren't on board. We have to go after them. We have to make sure threatening journal editors who publish anyone who dissents from the UN narrative. We're going to defund you. We're going to avoid Freedom of Information Act requests. It was the top echelon of UN scientists colluding like a political campaign for everyone to stay on message. And I don't need to explain this to your audience because you all witnessed it firsthand on a national scale with COVID. If any scientist dissented from what Anthony Fauci said, they were immediately defunded, canceled, and sent packing. And that's exactly what's been happening in the climate debate for decades, but beneath the public eye because no one really pays that much attention to climate science.
It's also beneath contempt. What we saw in the pandemic, the COVID-19, so-called COVID-19, it's the Wuhan virus, period. To see Dr. Anthony Fauci come on my show just in the early days of the pandemic, and I said point blank that is an engineered virus. It's that straightforward. And he said, no, this is not that, and the Chinese are blameless, and blah blah blah. And by the way, there was a circle of people who depended on Fauci, doctors, some of the finest doctors in the country. They depended on him for those grants, and they were backing up his lying narrative. And some of them were in the Wuhan laboratory for some period of time, so they knew what was going on there and lied through their teeth, not to somebody else. They were lying to me, and I've always taken that a bit personal. Thankfully, there are a lot of great doctors who stood up and, well, now I shouldn't say a lot. There were some great doctors who stood up and dissented and who were right as they possibly, I think the expression is right as rain. We'll be right back. We're talking with Marc Morano. Stay with us.
Wellness Company and their doctors are medical professionals you can trust. And their new medical emergency kits are the gold standard when it comes to keeping you safe and healthy. This medical emergency kit contains an assortment of life-saving medications, including ivermectin, Z-Pak. Rest assured, knowing that you have emergency antibiotics, antivirals, and antiparasitics on hand to help you and your family stay safe from whatever life throws at you next.
We're back with Marc Morano of ClimateDepot.com. We urge you to go to ClimateDepot.com to get, I think, the most factual based and honest reporting on what is happening with our planet and with our atmosphere, assuming that you can distinguish between the two. I guess one's gaseous and the other solid, but the reality is both have interesting qualities that are under assail from the leftist narrative in this world. Mark, let's go to this emergency that Joe Biden apparently wants to declare so he can have COVID-like powers once again and really feel that surge of power. This is a scary bunch, this puppet president and his masters.
This is the greatest threat I think we face from the climate agenda. And they're really taking a page directly from what they learned during COVID. What did they learn during COVID? That you could be literally declare an emergency and become a dictator overnight. In other words, the most consequential decisions of your life, whether you could leave your home, go to school, go to work, have a church open, have a medical procedure, canceling weddings, funerals, all without 1 ounce of democracy, Lou. That's what they loved. What does that remind you of? Reminds you of one-party rule China. Why would our leaders want to copy China? Well, for decades, go back to Tom Friedman on the pages of the New York Times, 2009, praising China's one-party rule for the leaders being enlightened leaders, enlightened intellectuals who can just get things done. The UN climate chief has said China is the model for the world to follow, doesn't have the messiness of democracy. Justin Trudeau openly said, I admire China's basic dictatorship. The Apple CEO praised China for having the same values as Apple on climate. Biden administration officials, the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, the UN secretary. I can go on and on. The entire ruling class of the world has admired China's governing. COVID brought
still do.
and still do, of course. And what did they like about COVID? COVID brought the once free West to literally become one-party rule China overnight. You didn't need no stinking democracy, to paraphrase Viva Zapata, the movie. We don't need no stinking badges. We don't need no stinking democracy. That's what happened under COVID. So what happens? John Kerry comes out in 2020 and says, the parallels between COVID and climate are screaming at us. You have a teen activist, climate activist in Vogue say, if we can shut down the world for a virus, we can do the same thing for climate. So then what happens is the Biden administration gets in, they start formulating a policy. Hey, how do we get COVID-like powers? So they came up with this, and it's been leaked 3 times, once the Washington Post, once the Associated Press, most recently now the Bloomberg News. They want to declare a national climate emergency, which would, according to NBC News, Lou, give Biden administration 9/11 emergency type powers and COVID-like powers. Keep in mind, 9/11, we're still living under those emergency powers. That gave us a surveillance state. 9/11 gave us a biosecurity state.
You know, I'm torn on this because part of me would really like them to try this one more time, because the American people, we have been fooled. We were fooled in the pandemic. We were exploited in that, but I don't think anybody will be again. Only the left will.
Yes.
But I really think that there will be a screaming renunciation by the American people of this administration and everything it stands for. So there's part of me that would love to see that, to even try it, because I really do believe the country would, is almost as one, say, go to hell. And somebody needs to start saying go to hell in a very big way in this country to all of these Marxist Dems and their crazy plans, the oligarchs and the billionaires who've decided that if they huddle together in Davos, Switzerland, once a year, maybe twice if necessary, that they could rule the world. This stuff has to be stopped, and it can only be stopped with truth. And an American people who remember what rights are theirs.
Yeah, and that's what Joe Biden wants to do. The Center for Biological Diversity, it would grant a climate emergency, would give Biden 130 new wartime presidential powers by which he could bypass democracy. That's frightening. And that's what they're looking to do because, and you're right about the blowback. Let's hope we learned our lesson. I think I was talking to public health people. They said one of the biggest mistakes the American people made with COVID was a lot of us kept waiting for, where are the protests? Where is the pushback? And we waited. And next time, day one, we have to start pushing back. I mean, if we go back in time, you push back immediately on a COVID declaration, push back immediately on social distancing, push back immediately on any climate government economic shutdown. Instead, we were all, we got duped, and we know we were duped. I mean, Deborah Birx and Anthony Fauci, Deborah Birx in her book wrote how she and Anthony Fauci openly tricked Donald Trump into the 2 weeks to flatten the curve, knowing it wouldn't be 2 weeks. And you can see their gleeful face in that fateful March press conference when I believe Donald Trump ended his presidency by declaring that COVID emergency and agreeing to the 2 weeks to flatten the curve, because that tanked the economy and ended his record, unbelievable, prosperous, successful first term on that day. I think he learned his lesson too, Donald Trump.
I certainly hope that he did, and I imagine full well. I haven't talked to him about that, but
yeah,
to be clear, he lost that election when Bill Barr, the Attorney General, did not intervene in the election to point out to the American people that the vice president at Barr knew full well, because he was in possession of the Hunter Biden laptop, lied through his teeth. And those 51 intelligence veterans, so-called, came forth with their letter of pure lies, saying that it was Russian disinformation. I think the American people who are paying attention now learned a very important lesson, and that is that Marxist Dems are just simply Marxists. There's no Dem in it. To protect this great republic, this constitutional republic, it's on us to make sure that the public right to know is served, and to know that truth prevails. And we thank you for helping in both of those missions for the American people and for all of us citizens in this great, wonderful country. Mark, thanks for being with us here. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks again to Marc Morano, and his book again is The Global Reset. Thank you for being with us today. Be sure to join us here tomorrow for the Great America Saturday Show. Follow me on Twitter and Truth Social at Lou Dobbs. And thank you, everybody, for being with us. God bless you, and may God bless America.